This is the repetition of at least on the other side.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a good candidate. And I love the fusion right there, which is the one we would like to keep. And that's the part that, those two are part of that branch.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one cut that will make a big difference. And the rest, it's a combination of removal and reduction cuts throughout the canopy on definitely the west side, with diameters reaching 6-7 inches in places in order to reduce leverage
And reduce that hormonal.
and push the side towards that. I'm sorry, what is the name? What is the name? Mora.
Yeah.
And algae.
Yeah.
And Mora said that the garbage truck is removed in this branch. This is about every morning, every time they come here. So, like a branch like this one, decide to go and maybe remove this one and keep this one, like offset some of the branches. That's a big one dead. This one is dead.
Now number 10, and there has been, huh?
Something on the list,
Yeah.
So Scotty was part of the committee to nominate trees, looking at the nominations, accept or reject, and this one was obviously accepted. And so because he was involved with this, I wanted him to know, initially it was like a call saying, oh, did you know that,
Yeah, number 10 has issues now, right.
Conversations start to blossom. And then because of the status, that's why I thought it would be a good idea to find out how much it would cost to have a pool test on it. And the pool test obviously costs money because you also have people coming all the way from Seattle, since they're the only one with a tool. And we were thinking that if the pool test was not an option at all, we would still, knowing what the conch is doing to the tree, we would still know that what we have to do is reduce the leverage.
Right. That's the only option is trimming.
And because the tree is healthy at this point, it's a good candidate to go through this kind of.
So how much would you trim? 5%? I mean, where do you start? You're going to have some kind of a trimming plan.
A branch like the one we looked at, that's bordering 5% easily in one cut.
Okay.
And so what we have to do is, when this one is gone, so you have this one and this one are part of the cut we're going to do. So it's an enormous amount of leverage.
Yep.
That will have to go and take care of the lean. The thing is, by removing all this canopy, you're opening, the wind is going to look at the tree and react with the tree in a different way. So we have to be careful with that too. You might expose branches to the wind that were protected by the branch we will have to remove to reduce the amount of leverage. So for every cut you make, there's a consequence. So you really have to establish your plan of action, and sometimes it's as we go, we have a few strategic cuts we want to do, and whenever those branches are removed that we know, the arborist is looking, arborists going to have probably 2 guys up in that tree, we'll look at the rest of the tree and say, okay, now this branch is exposed a little bit more, maybe we should do a little bit more cuts to reduce leverage and reduce the sway. Yeah, it's going to be a different tree, but it's going to be a safer tree. But there's no such thing as a safe tree. They don't exist.
And with growth like that, we don't expect another 100 years, huh?
You're not going to have another 100 years.
30 tops based on historical experience.
Well, I would advocate for striving for.
And I guess as soon as that thing slows down, if your trimming slows it down, the leaning from your plumb bob,
I don't think it's going to slow it down.
but it's still going to be eating roots. I mean, and you
right. So
can't
the
chop that off. You can't give it a shot. It's just, once it's there, it's there. And you just have to do
what form it persists.
mechanical remedy.
The goal is to keep it around as long as possible. The critical question or issue is going to be in what form, how much of the crown persists. If you were to do massive crown reduction, you'd alleviate a lot of weight, but then you'd zap the vitality of the tree.
You can't reduce.
Which would be early expense for no good benefit.
Yeah.
We can do the minimalist, and obviously then someone will look and say, well, if we have to trim this tree every year for the next 20 years, what's that count versus?
I'm not going to do every year. What the goal is after the initial pruning is to come and look at the response of the tree. What we hope to see are cuts producing interior growth, because as the tree gets smaller,
You think there's going to be new growth after you trim
that's
something?
what we want. That's what we want.
That's the goal.
I didn't think this guy was adding anything except
No,
she's still growing.
Tremendous amount of vitality.
All right.
So actually,
Oh, absolutely.
See,
when I see that
still alive.
right there, Scotty, I'd love to keep this little. See that
Yeah,
little epicomic? So we could
agree,
possibly do
yeah.
a branch,
Exactly.
and maybe doing that break right
Yeah,
there,
exactly.
and keeping this, because the majority of the leverage is gone.
Exactly.
And if we have, I think this one either is dead or maybe it's alive.
Yeah.
But whatever we see that
Makes
is.
good sense. Yeah.
So the
Okay.
So you could make a good guess of how many years it would last.
I would strive to keep it around. So this type of pruning in veteran tree management is known as retrenchment pruning. The Europeans have been doing it for several decades now, or if not longer. And some of the ancient trees which persist, they begin like this, just a full crowned, beautiful classic form tree that they realize due to decay or problems, they've got to bring down the size, but they want to do it in a controlled and gradual manner that keeps vitality as high as possible. And they turn it from a full crown tree like this to a smaller, more compact tree with a much lower center of gravity, much less wind resistance and surface area for catching snow and ice, and the decay can advance, but without the same target potential that it has. So the goal would be to keep at least the main trunk up to a certain height. Even if the whole tree were to expire, it still has tremendous value ecologically and visually. And I love Rob's idea. I think this is also a call to action to start planning the next cohort of trees that can tap into. This tree has done a tremendous amount of work establishing an underground root and mycorrhizal network, or the soil. And if you plant here same species, those trees will take off. We lost two magnificent trees almost this size on River Road, and unfortunately those failed altogether, and we replanted, and I've never seen 6 feet of growth.
6 feet of growth. And it's an Oregon white.
You're saying the new baby oak taps into the old grandma oak down below and uses the root system?
Yeah.
So I have 3 new ones in my daffodil pots, and I think they're from this tree. So
Yeah.
Nice.
Those would
Genetically,
be,
yeah. Ideally, and that's a maintenance thing too, if you had the chance to get rid of all the ivy,
I would.
That's a plus?
that would be differently. Yeah.
oh, you'd advocate to get rid of all
Ivy
the
didn't help?
Oh,
It's just competition, and it complicates. Left to its own devices, that tree. If we could ask it, what would you like? Leave the ivy or retain, or remove the ivy? I sense, and based on what I know, I think it would give 2 thumbs up.
All the nutrients that a tree could get from its own leaf is
And what would you put there? Just the dirt?
nothing. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Or
Rather-
mulch, right.
Mulch and the leaves of the tree
Yeah.
should be just left to decompose at the base of the tree.
Charlene, our resident biologist here, would love to hear that because she's
And you know
she's
the
very anti-ivy.
you know the ivy. If you had like a work party, you could actually get rid of this patch of ivy in one day, assuming you have enough people. And it's about pulling and rolling and just getting rid of it. We're not asking you to get rid of the ivy everywhere, but this is.
And it's kind of divided off kind of nicely by itself anyway, with the path blocking that side, and we could just chop it.
Yeah.
All right, we will consider that.
And no irrigation.
No irrigation. Okay.
I don't think there's any in there now.
There
Well, I'll
used to
see.
be, I guess, and you guys recommended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those roots got to be down in groundwater anyway, don't they?
Well, yeah, the soil here is, this tree is very adapted to.
Good pasture. You look at historic photos.
It's the name Good Pasture says a lot. And also, it is a tree that is notorious for drought resistance. Oregon white oak could go for 3 weeks in 95-degree weather. They just don't care.
Of course, it was just a guy's name, Good, It was Mr. Good Pasture. I used to think, that makes sense. Good Pasture was named after a function, but it is named after a guy.
river is very close.
Although I'm working on a PowerPoint presentation and have an aerial photo from 1950 of floods, and this was all farm fields and orchards.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my folks bought here originally in the 80s. Obviously, none of this was here.
Yeah.
And the sheep and everything were in the field. And so, yeah, a lot of change since the 80s. And I've got one picture from the 60s, which I managed to find online out of the archives, which shows this tree and the farmhouses.
I haven't looked for this tree in particular. I'm certain that I could pick out its crown from that flooding photo.
Yeah, if you got any historical, you got my email there on my
Great,
card.
I
So
yeah, fun.
I've been keeping track of this baby. Well, history of the island.
Yeah.
No one seems to have any old pictures, but back in those days, they were all physical.
Right.
People just throw them in a drawer and,
Well, I have some beautiful ones in the moon and the snow and everything.
Yeah, well, we will collect that stuff over time as we try to, document our historical tree.
So yeah, if you hear nothing else, this is an extraordinary tree, and if ever there was a tree that was worthy of extraordinary measures and going the extra mile, even if we know this tree will not be able to persist in its current condition, but that's okay. Part of its grandeur, as I mentioned, the concept of veteran trees, even if that were simply a habitat snag, it would still be a magnificent specimen that has profound ecological values. So I would say, in terms of those extraordinary efforts, doing your best to retain this tree over the long term in whatever form it takes. Obviously, the more similar it can be to its current condition, the better, but it will have to watch and see what Mother Nature wants. Simultaneously, now is the time we can facilitate new trees, and as Rob and Albie mentioned, by replanting at this site, the new trees can tap into the underground system, and although Oregon white oak is known to be a slow-growing tree, 6 feet of growth is as fast as any poplar I know of, and it
In a year, huh?
in a year, it's just extraordinary. So
Wouldn't that also be fighting for resources, though?
No.
Because, we cleared out several pines so this guy could have more freedom.
That's right. So
Right,
given that these
3
are
years ago,
going
we
to be,
lost. Well, we cut them out, I guess, on your Sperry's recommendation.
so these would be the same species and maybe even the same genetic makeup. So it would be a symbiotic and complementary as opposed to a competitive situation.
We can get to that. Remove the ivy, maybe sister trees, but they would have to be outside its canopy, wouldn't it? Well, we'll get the details.
Yeah,
We don't
not
worry about it.
necessarily.
They could both grow up amongst themselves.
Yeah.
Share space,
The
basically.
more light and resources it has, the better. But for the purposes at hand. But I'm sure that easy technical detail to attend to.
Okay.
Would it be oak trees then you'd be planting it?
Yeah, Oregon white oak, and ideally, if you had the same the progeny from this tree, that would help guarantee success of establishment. And then the other objective is certainly to reduce mechanical leverage,
Yep.
so height and distance from
The trunk, right.
especially on that side, retaining counterbalance where it makes sense to promote stability and to afford the tree a chance to reinforce itself. So
Sure.
the challenge at this point is to keep the tree vitality up high so it can outpace the advance of decay from the
Okay.
organism.
And then our first bet there is obviously remove the ivy because that's going to help it be healthier.
Yes,
And mechanically, obviously, that's going to take some stress off the old back.
that's right.
Okay.
And then in periods of
But maybe not every year we have to make
no,
those cuts?
no.
Oh,
It could be every 3 or 4, or I guess we'll watch
5 to 10.
5
and
to
the tree
10.
will tell you.
Oh, good. That's
There
good
is-
news.
If you were
for the
to
budget.
search for retrenchment pruning,
Yep.
There are a number of online resources that show describe the general concept of retrenchment pruning and show case studies that stretch back hundreds of years. Oaks that were devastated, had catastrophic failures, but then have been tended and have returned full crown, but much shorter and compact. So
Okay.
that would be the objective here, to have your cake and eat it too. Retain the tree, but increase the margin of safety and stability that the tree has.
Well, every 5 years certainly sounds manageable.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a tremendous amount of work as you do your research into retrenchment pruning. One of the pioneers is Neville Fay, and that is Fay. He's one of the pioneers of this undertaking and has done a lot to explain and done a lot of trial and error. And so we're doing it with city trees wherever it makes sense, and if this were a city tree, this is exactly what we would do. And as you can understand, as a municipality, we have to place risk concerns.
Sure, sure.
They're paramount. So we certainly understand that you have to do the same.
Yeah.
And also cost.
We have to make sure
cost
people don't get
containment.
squished out here, right?
It's a balance between maximizing the tree's benefits
Sure.
and minimizing costs and liabilities.
Roger that.
Yeah, so I would recommend if you're hoping to garner funds to preserve the tree and undertake work, to start a GoFundMe campaign. It would be easy to take the proposal that Sperry gives, add some photos. I'd be happy to give a testimonial about the wisdom of the proposal, the proposed work, and then just say this is definitely what we need to see more of throughout our community. This is a heritage or legacy oak, and if you care about trees, maybe you can kick in $20, $50, $100 to help the cause, and let's start adding some good news to.
Right. We have other
things
oaks
around.
on the island, but no other historical oaks. This is the only one left on the island, as far as I understand.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
It's a mountain here, and then and this is experimental.
Sure.
You know, this is not a really common practice.
Yeah, I was surprised that you'd think about putting a tree so close to such a big tree, because we've removed several pines so it would have more room to breathe.
Well, this would grow up, and then once the tree was at the height of that limb, you know, grafting the top of that tree into this tree.
And you have to-
Okay. That
you
is,
have to think about, you know, the long-term project is to accept that the tree will be smaller,
sure.
smaller, and smaller.
And the
Just
support
like
system.
Scotty said, you do have trees in England and in France and in Belgium who are 600-700 years old.
Woohoo.
Used to be this tall, and now they're 35 feet tall, bushy.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of decay in the trunk, but who cares?
Yeah.
They don't.
So you're saying a nearby tree would actually go up and they won't join it, would it? Or is it just, I can,
That's the graft would allow the new tree to get a connection via the vascular system with the root system of the tree that has still.
I mean, I can see it down below. It's going to connect, but it's not going to connect up there.
They would just graft with each other, and
Okay.
the new tree would benefit from the nutrients that the
More fun stuff to study. Yep.
It would be an experiment.
yeah.
You know, it's not a common practice.
Here are the crops
And
that
Doesn't take much.
similar to what Rob was describing. Here is an
there's
example.
No way that it would be a
1910,
negative
this
impact on
very prominent oak looked like that, suffered some catastrophic limb failures, and then over time they brought it down, and now it looks like that after regenerating. So went from a full tall crown, but they kept the vitality up, to now much more compact. It's hard to imagine it's the same tree. Likewise, this tree used to be much bigger, then over time
It's like the one
it
at
was brought
Stewart
down.
Pond.
Yeah.
You know the big black oaks at Stewart Pond?
And here's a description, guidance for retrenchment pruning, where the first series you undertake very small, with hand clippers basically, to shift the hormonal balance. Once that it takes successfully, you can do successive stages of pruning to promote growth. By doing that initial one, it will hopefully induce lower sprouting, and excellent resources available to understand the process before and then nurturing.
Very cool. All right, we will.
It is the kind of thing that if the HOA decides to go for, it's almost like a commitment. Because you can't really say it's a one-time visit, fix it all, and then we.
No, but if it's like 2 to 5 years between prunings, that's a lot more easy to budget, or obviously just simply pay
That
for.
would be a recommended time frame.
And then I really, I know that I personally could garner quite a few people who would say, hey, you have a chance to help preserve this tree and sponsor
Kind of the GoFundMe thing.
the GoFundMe thing, and I know that we could garner resources that way for you.
Good.
I can't do it via the city, but through my personal network, and not just in Eugene. I have friends who love ancient
Oaks.
enough to say,
Connected.
yeah, exactly.
Family of the Oak,
Start
right?
a fund that would build interest and be available.
Good.
Hopefully they.
Okay. That's the big cut. I guess that's what it got down to, just one. That's as far as I got. Took some all day to do the parts that were north of that.